But of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. And the Lord said, It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him an help meet for him. This was the very first time we heard about the aspect of death in the Bible, the very first time ever. The second time is whereby we see Eve talking to the serpent. She says, But of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest you die. So we have to make a direct comparison between the first passage and the second one. We see a distortion of information and Eve adding something that wasn't said primarily. And the third time, we see the serpent also talking about death, because it had now been brought to their attention because the serpent had succeeded in tricking them so that they would now be victims of death. The fourth time is mentioned in the Bible, Adam actually dies. Then the fifth time, Seth then dies after inheriting the curse from Adam. So do we see now how all these things came into being? And all the days of Adam were 930 years and he died. So death now became something that actually exists, not just talked about. And all the days of Seth were 912 years and he died. People really started dying after there was a subsequent distortion of information by Eve. And all the days of Enos were 905 years and he died. He died. So following Enos, we have the death of this man right here. And all the days of Canaan were 910 years and he died. Now death had become a reality. And all the days of Mahalalel were 895 years and he died. So are you following the dynamic? And all the days of Jared were 962 years and he died. Follow me. And all the days of Methuselah were 969 years and he died. People were now dying, and all the days of Lamech were 777 years and he died. So the curse of death came as a punishment to our sin after we fell. So God subsequently sent a flood to destroy everything that was flesh, wherein there was the breath of life in it. So he had to literally punish humanity and everything that was under the sun using death. So here we see that death is one of the tools that God uses to punish sin. Here we can clearly see that death is something that overtakes every soul under the sun. As Solomon said, time and fate overtakes every man. So apparently we see that everybody dies, but we see people were exempted from death. For example, and Enoch walked with God and he was not, for God took him. This man was exempted from death. Then we have Elijah, who went up in a whirlwind to heaven. So we have these two men who were exempted from death, and Elijah apparently who was said to be one of the prophets who's going to return before the great and dreadful day of the Lord. So right now we need to get back into our main issue and interrogate, how did death originate? Where did it come from? And can we escape it? If so, how can we go about escaping death? Or is it a fate that catches up with every man? But before we get into that, we need to zero in on where did death come from? How did it originate? And how did it enter our DNA? How did humanity get to a point whereby death became a reality? Since we all know that in Genesis, man was not pre-intended to die. It was never part of the grand narrative of God for people to die. People were not supposed to get sick. They were not supposed to feel any pain or sorrow or even to die. So how did we end up here? But for us to get to a point whereby we can understand these things, we need to go back to where it all started, to the beginning. So let me take you back to how we got here. So the only way we can get to understand where we are going is for us to try to understand how we started. So let's get back into it. So right now I have to take you back to Genesis 2 verse 17, which says, But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die. That was a direct command, a peremptory instruction from God. And one thing that we should know about God is this: He is obedient to His word to the latter, and each and every one of His instructions has consequences upon disobeying it. Death was initially put in place as a consequence or insubordination to divine instructions. It's like, for example, if we say, do not eat this poisoned apple, because in the day that you eat from this poisoned apple, you shall surely die. Because there is poison in the apple. After eating from that apple, because of the poison, you would surely die. And it would come as a consequence for doing something that you were told not to do. So death was one of those things that were just put in place to be consequences of lack of subordination. And unfortunately, it happens to be a consequence with multi-generational contagious effect. It is inherent in nature. It is passed down from generation to generation. Regardless of that, God, in His sight, sees as few individuals who are worthy to be exempted of death. And backing up my claim is because the seventh man from Adam was not contaminated with this curse. We see Enoch walking with God until God took him. Enoch walked with God and he was no more, for the Lord took him. Then we see in 2 Kings a man who walked with God, who would occasionally get visits from God, Elijah. Elijah would get occasional visits from God. He would get food sent to him through angels by God. He would command fire to rain from heaven. He would stop the rain from falling for 3 years. He would call down the rain to now fall. After praying, this man was exempted from death. And the third man, who wasn't even really a man to begin with, but God incarnate, God Himself, is Jesus Christ. But his case is different because He actually had to go through death first so that He can conquer it and come back to life and not die. Jesus Christ went to heaven alive. So these people were exempted from death because they just walked so closely to God, to the extent that the curse loosened its grip on them, and it could no longer have any effect on them as it did on Adam and the rest of his descendants. So how did we arrive at a stage and a state whereby we became individuals who are in bondage and in chains and victims of death? Because one way or the other, we are going to die if we are not taken up in a whirlwind like Elijah, or just taken by God as He did with Enoch, or just ascend as Jesus Christ did. There is only one fate that awaits us, and that is the grave, that is death. How did we get here? So right now I'm going to back to where it all started, the garden. And the Lord said, "It is not good that the man should be alone, and I will make him an help meet for him." This was what caused it all. So God saw that it wasn't good for Adam to be alone. So what did He do? And out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. So all these things God was doing to please Adam because he was lonely. Then Adam gave names to all cattle and the fowl of the air and every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found any help meet for him. And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh instead thereof to make the woman. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from man made he a woman and brought her unto the man. So if you understand, this was the primary purpose why God had to make the woman by his design. And Adam said, "This is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man." So women literally came from man as the dynamic of creation. "Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh." Because initially they were one flesh. The woman was taken out of the man, and the man is part of the woman. Now I need you to pay close attention to why the animals of the field were formed in the first place. Because Adam was lonely. Why the woman was formed in the first place? To be a helpmate. Because Adam was lonely. But now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, "Yet God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden." This was the devil's first point of infiltration, because he knew that Eve was not there when God had given the initial command. So Eve was more permeable and more susceptible to manipulation. And the woman said unto the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest ye die." So here is where you see the initial distortion of the original commandment that God has given. God had never said anything about not touching it. That means Eve's subordination was out of fear of even going close to it, but it came from a place of misconstruing the information. And the serpent said unto the woman, "Ye shall not surely die, for God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, there your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil." So this was the initial infiltration of the very first lie that came into the world. Notice how a lie can be perfectly crafted to contain 99% of the truth, and its departure from truth is only credited to that 1% of a lie. So this is how manipulation works. That's why most people cannot even identify false prophets of this day and age, because they come with a gospel that is likely and seemingly corresponding to the gospel of Christ, but it has an element of lies that is within it that you cannot discern if you are not of a discerning spirit. So Eve was manipulated to think that, of course, this was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So on that, the devil seemingly seemed to be telling the truth. But on the part that your eyes will be opened, it was a subtle way of trying to cement a lie using truth. So he had to surround the lie with truth so that the truth would be mixed up in the lies so as to confuse the victim. So Eve was told that on the day that you eat of this fruit you shall become like gods, when God himself had said, on the day that you eat of this fruit you shall surely die. So indeed there was eye-opening that was involved, as the devil had alluded to in his statement. The eye-opening which did not result in becoming gods as the devil had alluded to, but in death actually,